I'm George Bochenek.
And I'm Gavin Rehkemper.
And we both work in professional services. I'm out of DC, and Gavin's out of St. Louis. So what that means is we end up doing a lot of large-scale projects. We use Web App Builder a lot. We do a decent amount of JavaScript API. But over the course of our work, we've developed a number of best practices, tools that we use. Some of them we've developed ourselves. Some of them we rely on the kindness of the open source community and our coworkers. We much prefer those ones. But we're going to talk today about how you can use those tools and how you can really streamline your development environment when you're using Web App Builder. There's a lot to the framework. It can get pretty complicated, and it's easy to get confused with using your normal developer workflows with the added file sync capacity. So Gavin's going to talk a little bit about what's been happening in Web App Builder in the last year or so, and sort of where we stand on the product.
You switch to me. All right. So before I get started, how many of you have all used Web App Builder already? Okay, like almost all of us. Okay, so just give a quick background on Web App Builder for those who haven't. Web App Builder gives your users a WYSIWYG interface to build apps around their maps, adding out-of-the-box, custom widgets or themes. So this is the same builder experience that was kind of in the Flex Builder, if you use that, now brought over to JavaScript. The Web App Builder has a variety of themes, and they're all responsive. The generated apps can be tested within the builder interface, or you can kind of be launched into a separate window, or you can even use the previews area to see what your app looks like in a mobile environment. Web App Builder is great for many situations. One of the best is when you need to build a multi-purpose app that is mobile ready and responsive. It's also great if you have if you want to build a lot of apps that are similar. So think of if you have a company intranet or something where you want to create 5, 10, 15, or 100 apps that have the same look and feel but maybe differ a little bit. It's really great for that. It's also great for you as developers to build a set of custom widgets and themes, and you can allow your users who may not be developers to compile those into apps themselves. So you kind of have a core set of widgets for your company or your organization, and you just set your non-developers out to build your apps for you. Of course, no tool is perfect for all situations. I think we all know that. So if you need a specific custom or super complex web application, Web App Builder might not be the best choice for you. But the great thing is that the same skills that we all have from working with the JavaScript API for years translate over to creating custom widgets and themes for Web App Builder, and vice versa. If you gain some skills building Web App Builder widgets, you can transfer those back to custom apps. So last year at this time, we were talking about Web App Builder 2.0, which was still in beta. We're now on 2.3. So going through a few of the updates through the years, we now have feature actions, which are which are showing here, which is an action that executes on one feature or a set of features when requested. The new versions also brought new widgets and updates to existing widgets, including filter widget, share widget, the smart editor widget. A lot of people really liking, just to name a few. But today we're going to talk about the latest developer edition that you can download from the website, version 2.3. Let me jump into that real quick. So here's Web App Builder version 2.3. A few of the new features of this include the extent history widget. So you can see here with the left and right arrows. So as I move around the map, I can go back and go to a previous extent. One cool widget that I wanted to show is the Add Data Widget. I think we've all used this over the past couple of years, but you can now allow uploading of different types of data. So if I save this and launch, you can now upload CSVs, shapefiles, or even GeoJSON. So to show an example here, I've got a map of bicycle racks locations in Chicago, Illinois, and maybe as a user, I might, as a user of this app, I might want to get some more context. So I can allow my users to upload some GeoJSON. I happen to have some right here, and really quickly and easily, I've got some polygons of the neighborhoods of Chicago, and that gives my map a lot more context. And it was super easy to let my users do that. So I really love the Add Data widget. Another cool widget that got an update over the past year is the Directions widget. It can now have defaults, either start or end location. So you see here I configured the Directions widget to automatically route me to CloudGate in Chicago no matter where I click. So if I click here, I only have to click once and it routed me down to downtown Chicago. I didn't have to put in both of my places. So that's really nice. Web App Builder, let me switch back to slides. Web App Builder can handle 2D and 3D. The 2D version is using the 3.x version of the JavaScript API. And the 3D, if you create a 3D app in Developer Edition, like is shown here, it's actually using the 4.x JavaScript API version. So that's pretty cool, and you can create your 3D apps if you're into that. So this talk at its core is kind of about the patterns and the tools that we in professional services have developed in working with Web App Builder projects over the past couple years. If you were at this talk last year, you'll notice that a lot of the patterns are still the same or similar, but we're continuing to improve the tools both internally and with all your help with open source type sharing. There are 5 patterns that we found that have improved our development efficiency and enjoyment in professional services. The first one is keep your source code outside of Web App Builder folders, especially if you're working on a team. This one is super valuable. Basically, we want to treat the Web App Builder files as almost like a library that we don't really touch, and we keep our custom code in our source code management, and it's kind of separated. We'll get more into that later. You should not create your widget files from scratch. That's a super headache, and there's a few ways you can go about doing that. One of them is to use the Yeoman generator, which we'll get more into later. You should test your code outside of the Web App Builder. Testings, unit testing, all the different types of testing are very important. And you should build your applications for production. A great way to make the user experience better is to make your app load faster. And George is going to go into how to, an easy way to build your Web App Builder applications into a more efficient package. So you might be saying to yourself, like, okay, those patterns are great, but like keeping my code separate, like I can do that manually. I don't have to be using tools. Oh, sorry, I got wrong slide there. So do I really need these tools? You might be saying that to yourself, and use the pattern, you want to use the patterns only without worrying about these new tools. Well, the GUI WYSIWYG is quite powerful, kind of allowing non-developers to build apps, but that comes at a cost, right? Allowing configurators to easily build apps makes it harder for us as developers because we have to make sure everything is right and in its right place. So you have all these extra tasks you have to do. For example, you have to conform to the strict widget file structure. You have to make sure copies of your widget are in the stem app and the app folders. We'll get more into that later. Generators automate this extra work for us. They can scaffold out boilerplate code automatically, and they can install and configure tools like Grunt to automate tasks for us, which is particularly helpful in opinionated frameworks like Web App Builder, because the more opinionated a framework, the more value you can get out of generators, because there's a predictability about them, about where we need to place files, where Web App Builder is expecting files to be. And in fact, you can think of Web App Builder as an opinionated framework on top of the JavaScript API. And that's kind of one common thread that kind of go through all those patterns that'll help you be more successful. What do I mean by opinionated? Well, there's a heavy use of convention if you look at the structure of a widget. So if you haven't seen the structure of a custom widget, that's what's up on the screen here. Typically, there will be a manifest.json, there will be a widget.js file, and all these other things. And the app assumes kind of where to look at things. And that concept is kind of influenced by Ruby on Rails and Ember, and that has similar patterns. So we want to have set up the same automated tasks for kind of most of our projects. And we have a lot of boilerplate code and files that we need to get created during development. Well, that's a perfect situation for a generator, which is why we kind of created this tool a few years ago, and lots of people have found it useful, including yourselves. It's an open source project. It's out on GitHub. And it's gotten a lot of enhancements over the past years through us and through the community. So what does the generator do? Well, if you've never used the generator before, its main two purposes are to install tools to transpile and copy your source code into Web App Builder folders, and two, it has a sub-generator to generate out widget files for you to save time, so you don't have to create all those files manually. So talking again about the open source community, we have had some great new features over the past year, including the ability to have SASS styling, so you don't have to write CSS. You can write, use the SASS preprocessor. There's some logic in there now to copy your custom themes that we've gotten from the community, and we've had a bunch of bug fixes, and we've done a lot of planning for the future as well. We'll get into a demo about how the generator works in kind of just a moment, but that was kind of just an overview of those patterns, and here they are again. And we'll now kind of go through some of these patterns individually. So the first one, going back to it, is the source code. So the best way to keep your sanity as developers is to keep our custom source code outside of Web App Builder folder structure. So getting into a demo here, you might be saying, what does that Web App Builder folder structure actually look like? So I've downloaded Web App Builder from developers.arcgis.com, and I've already extracted the files to a folder here. And this is what it looks like when you unzip it. You've got 3 folders, as well as the startup.bat, which is what you use to launch it. If we dig into the client folder, there's a STEM app folder and a STEM app 3D. And those are kind of the core apps and core files that Web App Builder uses to build the applications that you're building. Obviously, STEM app is for 2D and STEM app 3D is for 3D. If we jump into STEM app and widgets, this is kind of where all of the widgets are stored. So this is all of the out-of-the-box widgets. You can browse to them, see the fully unminified source code, and they're all there. So if we build a custom widget, we need to get our widget into here. And so if you've used Web App Builder before, you know that when you create an app and you add a widget to your app, what it does is it takes the widget from this widget repository right here, and it actually makes a copy out. And if I jump up again to the server folder under apps, it creates a folder for each one of your apps. And it actually copies that widget into the widgets folder in that app. So what does that mean? Well, we need to keep our widgets in kind of 2 locations as we're developing if we want to develop against our actual app. So that can sometimes be a headache. So yeah, what's clear there is we need to keep things, we want a tool to assist us in that task. And maybe it would be even a bonus if we didn't have to do anything, right? Maybe the tool is watching our source code folders and it's automatically going to copy things out to the appropriate place when we do that. Well, so now we'll enter the actual Yeoman generator here. So The Yeoman generator actually solves that problem. And the first thing that you kind of need to do before developing an app is actually to have an app that you want to place your widget into. So if I switch over to Web App Builder, I'll create a new app. And let's create a 3D app. And let's call it Test Dev Summit. And so I'll create an app on the fly here. And we can see that as this app is going, we can see in the URL bar that this is the app ID 3. So it's, as I add widgets, it's going to copy stuff into the, under server, under apps, it's going to create a folder called number 3, and it's going to copy stuff over there as I do that. So now we've got an app, and I want to create a custom widget to put into this app. So that's kind of step 1, just to get that app going. So the next is to move over to our command line. So there are a couple prerequisites that we want to do before we can use our Yeoman generator. The first one is to install Yeoman. The command for that uses npm, so I'm kind of assuming that you have Node.js installed. If you don't have that installed, go to their website and download that. I think we all have that already. So we do npm install -g and yo. Yo is short for Yeoman in this case. So that's actually going to install the engine for the generator. I'm not going to do that because I already have that installed. So Yeoman doesn't actually do anything out of the box. We have to install like the templates or the generators that you want to use. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. We have our generator is called Esri AppBuilder.js, and to install that into Yeoman, we use npm as well. So we'll do npm install -g and then generator Esri AppBuilder.js. So that'll actually install kind of the template files that Yeoman will use to generate these widgets for us. Again, I already have that installed, so I'm just gonna skip running that. And so those are all the prerequisites. So now, now I'm kind of in an empty folder. You can see here if I ls, I've got nothing in here. So this might be where your empty repository is. And I want to get started, so I'm going to just type yo. So that's going to bring up Yeoman, and it's going to show me all the generators that we have on my system. Esri AppBuilder.js is right here, so I'm going to select that. And here it's running. So basically, this is a system that's going to ask me a variety of questions and automatically generate all these files for me. The first thing it's noticing is that I don't have a package.json, and what I like to run npm init first. Well, that's nice. So basically what we have here is that we want to assume that npm init, that a package.json file exists so that it doesn't have to ask you as many questions. It's actually going to use the answers from your package.json file as part of the generator. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. So these are just some, if you're familiar with package.json, it's basically just a metadata file about what's going on in this project. So you would answer just all these questions. I'm just going to And so that npm init basically created me a package.json file. If I do more package.json, we can see that all it is a JSON file, and it's got some settings, and it's kind of stored that for me. So now I'm going to run Yeoman again and run our generator. This time I'm going to run a shortcut. Instead of doing yo, I'm going to do yo space Esri AppBuilder.js, and that's going to skip that first step for me. So this time it didn't stop me because it found the package.json and it continued on with its questions. So now it's asking me what type of widgets I'm going to want to use. I chose 3D in my app, so I'm going to choose 3D here. Next, it's going to ask for the install root of your web app builder. So let me switch over to there, copy this over. So now that we've told it where our web app builder install root is, our Yeoman generator has actually inspected that folder and has looked at all the apps that I have running in my web app builder developer edition. So you can see I had a couple apps, and this test dev summit one is the one that is the app that I just created. So I'm going to want to choose that one. And the last question is, would you like to use SASS? This is going back to, that's a new feature that we just added in. It's a fairly popular CSS preprocessor, so I'll click yes to do that. So now what Yeoman is doing is it's setting up some basic files for us for our project that will help us in our tooling. While this is running, let's kind of look at some of the files that is created. So here's my test folder that I just created. And the main file that it's created for us is a Grunt file. So if you're familiar with Grunt, Grunt's a task runner that basically helps you kind of helps you do development tasks while you're developing. And it's automatically generated this for us based on the answers that I answered in that Yeoman questions. So for example, here it automatically inserted the URL to that app that I chose, as well as the STEM app directory. It created and it also created a bunch of Grunt file tasks. So sync, Babel, and here's the watch task. So it's going to automatically watch my source code files and automatically copy it out to the appropriate place. Here's the copy and stuff like that. You don't have to know too much about what's going on here, but just that it's kind of generated automatically for you. It's also created a YoRC file that's saving some settings for later when I generate some widgets. It created a Babel RC file for us if we want to do ES 2016 later, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's basically created a bunch of files for us that's going to save us a lot of time. So now that's completed, and let me switch back to my slides real quick. So the next pattern is do not write widgets from scratch. So this gives me the opportunity to jump right back into a quick demo, and I'm going to use the second part of our Yeoman generator, the Widget Sub Generator, to actually generate all of my widget files without having to do really anything. So let me switch over to my command line again, and I'm going to run yo Esri AppBuilder.js, just like last time, but instead this time I'm going to put :widget, and this is going to run the Widget Sub Generator. And so when I do that, it's going to, again, ask me a series of questions, but this time about a widget that I want to create. So I could run this Widget Sub Generator multiple times if I want multiple widgets in my project. So I'm just going to leave the defaults here, my widget, the widget title, the description. This is all stuff that kind of goes into the manifest.json. Here it kind of asks what features we want to include in our widget. So if we want it to run inside a panel, or if it can be an off-panel widget. Do we want to translate it? Do we want to have styles? Do we want to have a configuration file? Most widgets I find have most of these things in them, but you can write your widget without these things technically, so it's asking you if you want to do that. Next, it's going to ask me if I want a settings page. So I think you might know that you can either write a widget with or without a settings page. If you don't do a settings page, it'll just kind of show the JSON config when the person adds it to the app. So I do want a settings page in this case. And then it's going to ask me similar questions from before. Do I want an HTML file, etc. Finally, the last one is kind of cool. This is asking what JavaScript syntax do I want. So I don't know if you've heard of the more modern JavaScript, ES6, or sometimes called ES6. It's called ES 2015. That's a new way of writing JavaScript. ES5 is kind of the current kind of traditional way. Let's go ahead and do ES 2015. And immediately there, that just took me a couple minutes, and it created all of these files for me. And it automatically kind of named them and put in the appropriate settings for us. So it's really an efficient way of creating my widget. Let's look at some of those files real quick. So here's where I was before, and now in my widgets directory, it created a folder for my widget, and it created all these files. So if I look at widget.js, for example, I called the base class myWidget, and it automatically put that in there. It creates some settings for you. It creates a widget.html. And in the manifest.json, it entered in all of the answers from those questions that it asked me. It automatically kind of translated those into a manifest.json file. It also pulled from the package.json. If you remember way at the beginning, I did an npm init. It pulled the author from the package.json, so it kind of saved me some time from not asking me that question. So if I run my Grunt, if you remember, it created a Grunt file for me, so all I have to do is type Grunt, and it's automatically going to look at my widget. It's going to copy out those files to my Web App Builder instance. And if I switch over to Web App Builder, when I go into widgets and I add widgets, now I see my widget here, which is really cool. So let me go ahead and add that to my app. It created this settings page for me with an example demo configuration file. So I'll click OK there, save it, launch it. And there's our widget. So it's super simple, easy, it's right there. And the nice thing about this grunt file is that it's running in the background, right? So I've got this watching my files, and if I change one of these files, right, like widget.html, let me add a dev summit here, and I save that. It'll be hard to see, but in the background here, there it goes. So notice that I made a change. It saved out those files again to Web App Builder. So as soon as I launch Web App Builder again, it'll have that change in here for me. There's my dev summit. It also has live reload built in, so if you install the live reload plugin in your Chrome or Firefox, the page will actually auto reload for you, so you don't even have to press the reload button. So we found that it's like a super nice way to develop widgets if you want to develop widgets within the context of your app. All right, so I'll pass it over to George.
All right, yeah, so it's really cool to have that generator. One of the really nice things it does is when you're publishing to Git or Subversion or whatever you're using in source control, is you don't have the whole Web App Builder app there. Nobody wants to download that a million times. So it's pretty solid. Our next pattern here is about wrapping your widgets. So there's a lot of work that goes into these widgets when you're actually developing them, not installing the boilerplate. And we want to make these widgets as flexible and portable as possible. A way to do that is to write the widget functionality as a vanilla JavaScript API widget that could work in any application. So you could throw it into something that's not the Web App Builder and get the same sort of functionality. And then you combine that into the Web App Builder itself as a framework. So by creating a widget that's more portable, you can go pretty much anywhere. You can test it without worrying about the overhead of the Web App Builder. And it's just more closely follow your organization's style guidelines, whatever you want to do. So what does that really look like? So I have here, this is a widget that I made using the Yeoman generator. And I've just added a couple things to it. So in the post create here and in startup, I'm calling a sub widget. And then inside my widget, I have a sub widget folder. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just a separate JavaScript API widget that I've made inside of the Web Builder. And we can see, if we actually look at the map, I have this application here. I have the widget, same icon because we use the generator. And the Web App Builder code is up at the top. It just says it's a custom Web Builder application. And then the sub widget is down here. If we look back at the code, we can see my sub widget. It's very simple. It just has a template and a simple section to zoom into the map. We connect that to the close function in the Web App Builder. And you can still build that in and test your sub widget by itself. So if I look at the sub widget HTML, very standard template. You guys all saw that show up on the widget, but it's not connected to anything. Maybe. Sometimes you really need to use the Web App Builder functionality. Your widgets talk to each other a lot. You're using all the events constantly. It sometimes ends up being more of a management widget. You don't need to fit a square peg in a round hole just to follow these best practices. Take a gut feel, do what seems right at the time. But I found that this practice works really well 90% of the time. And that leads us to the next portion, right? How do I test all this code? When you're going through and you start looking to test your applications, we're all good developers, we follow best practices, we try to do test-driven development. So you get through, you want to start writing your unit tests, and you start thinking, oh man, now I gotta set up tests that'll work with the web app builder. I need to start faking network calls. I gotta get the event structure set up. Stop it. You don't want to do that. This is a JavaScript API widget. Your code is very small compared to the web app builder, and we don't want to test the web app builder code. We can trust that the Esri team working on the web app builder code is testing their own functionality. So we don't want to test the map. We don't want to test the widget manager. We don't want to do any of that. I can show you some tests that I wrote on that very small application. So I have two tests that I run. And we can see that they both succeed. It should create a sub widget, and it should set the map level to 3. So that's very straightforward. It's just very broken down. We're not testing anything in the widget. If I look at my actual test here, before each one, I create the widget under test, which is my sub widget. I'm not actually pulling in anything from the web app builder. And because I'm not pulling anything in from the web app builder, I don't have to worry about dependencies. I don't have to worry about the past. I don't have to worry about the structure of the application itself. And then the tests, I can keep them very simple. Sanity test just says, make sure this widget exists. And the zoom into map test, again, we're not testing any Esri's code. And this time, while that's not the web app builder, it's the map function, right? Right now, I'm just saying I want that map.setLevel call to have been called. And I want it to be called with the argument 3. I can trust that the map.setLevel function is actually setting the level of the map to 3. I don't want to worry about testing that. And that really takes a lot of the headaches out of your unit tests. It takes a lot of headaches out of developing the application, and it lets you really leverage the power of having that scaffolding already set up. All right. So the next pattern we talk about is building your application for production, right? And like Gavin said earlier, one of the best ways you can make your app experience better for users is increasing performance. Over the years, we found one of the best ways to do this in JavaScript applications and in the web app builder is to run the Dojo Build. The Dojo Build goes through and it'll combine a number of the resources into a single file or far fewer files than come with the original application. So when you do that, you're making way fewer network requests, your code is minified, there's no more white space in it, so it's going to be a lot smaller. If you were here last year, I gave a talk about automating builds for production, and in it, I showed some of the early experimentations we were doing with building the web app builder automatically. This year, we've made a number of improvements to that task. So we have here just general command line, and similar to installing the Yeoman generator, we've created a tool called the Esri Web App Builder Build. Pretty self-explanatory. There's a few dependencies, so I would have to go through and install, same with npm as Gavin's tool. I'd have to go through and install globally Bower, which is one of the dependencies along with Node. And once I've done that, I can go and I can install Esri Web App Builder Build. And that's going to make it possible to run that single command line argument from any complete Web App Builder application. And this is going to be in the actual app that you're going to deploy in production, not in the widget code. Because it goes through, it checks your config file for which widgets you're using, and it builds out a layer file for them. So I'm going to kick off that build really quickly just by typing Esri Web App Builder Build. And once you've installed those initial 2 commands, this is all you'll ever have to type again. You don't have to install them every time you run a program. So I just hit that, and it kicks off, and it starts running. It does take a little while, so I'm going to terminate it now, and it really spins up your CPU. So the fans on your computers are going to start going, and you won't be able to do anything for a few minutes. But it's worth it. So if we look at a couple of these web apps here, I can pull out this build web app builder one. and make it so it's not zoomed quite so much. And we can see this is just a standard web app builder application. This is not built. And if I refresh it, there's no cache there. When we look at the bottom, it's making a lot of requests, right? We have 259 requests. You can't really see that, can you, here? Let me make that bigger. So there's 274 requests there. It took a decent while to load. And here's the built version. This is the same application. The same thing's going on here. Except, if I go through and load, you can see now we have 128 requests. So that's a significant improvement. It's a couple seconds faster to load initially. And there's only 22 JavaScript requests now. The more widgets you have in your application, the more features you have, the bigger this difference is going to be, the more compact it's going to make your application, and the more savings you're going to see from users. One of the other benefits here is now all my widgets are already loaded. So when you're using the unbuilt version of the app, which is the one most people would publish out on the internet, every time I select a widget here, you can see that number jump up quite a bit. So you're going to have to load a number of things no matter what, the images, things like that. But when we go through and don't have to load the JavaScript, that saves us again. If I load all of these, we can see we're up to 429 requests now. If I do the same thing here, you can see they load all at once. There's no requests, and I'm at 227. So that's a significant increase. And like I said, the bigger web app builder widgets are, the more you're going to see out of that. I'm going to restart my slides here. All right. Let's get back to where we were. So, like I said, that's an open source project. It's available on GitHub. We're constantly making improvements to it. There will be some more improvements over the year. It's something we use ourselves when we deploy applications. Right now, it only works for 2D applications, so highest on the priority list, I think, is getting it to work with 3D. We want to make it so that there's fewer dependencies. We want to make it so the builds get even faster. There's a number of places we've identified that we can keep pushing this. So get in there, try it out with your own applications, and see where you get. If you have issues, log them. If you have a feature you want, log that. We're happy for the feedback, and we're happy to keep working on it. Along with that app, like I said, it's up on GitHub. There's another number of other great resources. The generator Gavin went over is also up on GitHub. So that's all available, open source. We take contributions, we take issues there, and give them serious interest. There's a great community out there. Over the last few years, the web app builder community has gotten pretty great. There's a number of guys out there writing widgets, maintaining them, publishing regular releases. And the only thing better than having a widget that's easy to write is having one that's already written for you. So definitely check those out. The documentation is the standard ArcGIS.com documentation. The web app builder page is decent. It has the JSON files, events that are specific to web app builder. But if you're doing development, again, you're writing JS API widgets that live in the web app builder ecosystem. So you're going to be pretty much living on the JavaScript API application. That's going to give you all the classes, samples, anything you need. Thanks a lot for coming. I hope you learned something. Please go and rate the session on the mobile app if you can, and let us know if you have any questions.
So we do have maybe a few minutes here. Does anyone have a question? All right.
You demonstrate testing the web app builder using Jasmine. Where do you store your tests relative to the rest of your content?
I stored my tests in the.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was, where did I store my tests relative to my content when using Jasmine? And the answer there is I store my tests with my widget, away from the Web App Builder framework. Because again, the tests aren't using the Web App Builder framework at all, so we don't need to keep it there.
Yep.
So you were talking about subclassing your widget so that you can isolate and test it separately. Does it work if you want it? If you're using actually other widget from Web App Builder, let's say Dojo Widget or Dojo Widget or stuff like that, does it break your pattern?
That's a good question. The question was, if you're using another widget in Web App Builder, does it break the pattern of wrapping a widget and using a sub widget and testing outside? And the answer is sometimes, right? You know, if you're using a lot of other functionality, like I said, it may make sense to deviate from the pattern. But if you're using one or two things here, like you send a message to the attribute table, or maybe you're just listening to an on-maximize event or an on-close event, it doesn't really break the pattern because you can still call that function in your sub-widget from the parent widget. So it's okay to add some helper functions to the main widget class. The important part is that you don't really need to test that, and you don't really need to work on that. You still just want to test the meat of the function.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Maybe one more in the back.
Yeah, does the grunt copy sync function just copy the widget into the server app folder? Does it also copy it into the stem app widgets folder as well?
Yeah, it definitely does both. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. Yep, and that's the whole point, right? Because you want it in both if you're going to create a new app or if you want to develop in your current app. Yeah, definitely.
Would it iterate through all of the apps in the server folder and then see if that has it, or?
No, so this, at least this grunt file is only focused on a single app. So, and I guess I didn't repeat the question, but I guess the question.
The question was, does the grunt tool iterate over each app in your Web App Builder structure, and does it automatically copy it to both the Web App Builder and the actual application? Yeah, and you saw when we were using the widget generator and the app generator there, it asked us which app we wanted to use, and that's where you define that.
And I mean, these concepts aren't, yeah, it's not like super complex, right? It's basically just doing copy. Like you could do the same thing with gulp. I think a previous session today showed an example using gulp, and you could even use like npm scripts or something. So it's really just taking that idea, and you can use our grunt thing, or you can do what you want. I think we'll call it there. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll be hanging out up here for questions.
Yeah, feel free to come up here.